Hey there, and welcome to this explainer. I am so incredibly pumped you're joining us today because we're about to completely flip the script on how you view every single conversation you have from this day forward. A lot of us walk around thinking that being a great communicator is just some innate talent, like you're either born with the gift of gab or you just aren't. But as we're going to see today, communication is actually an invisible psychological game. It's not magic. It's a highly learnable set of systems deeply rooted in the psychology of how our brains actually process information. So get ready, we're going to decode the unseen forces that literally dictate who gets listened to, who gets respected, and honestly, who just gets ignored.
And to kick things off, I've got an absolute bombshell of a statistic for you. Less than 10% of your actual influence comes from the literal words coming out of your mouth. 10%! Think about that for a second. We spend so much of our time agonizing over the exact perfect thing to say, but the other 90% of your impact, that is pure psychology and strategy. It's your energy, your pacing, your emotional regulation, and all those unconscious signals you're sending out. Basically, if you don't master the 90%, that 10% won't even be heard.
So, to get us there, we've mapped out the entire life cycle of an interaction. We'll uncover how we accidentally sabotage ourselves, dive into the raw neuroscience of first impressions, and figure out the real secrets to authority and ethical persuasion. Then, we'll break down the true formula for charisma before capping it off with a foolproof plan to make this psychology totally automatic.
All right, let's dive right into the first stage of this life cycle. We really need to look at the invisible game we're currently losing, usually by unknowingly sabotaging our own authority before we even utter a single word.
There are actually 7 fatal mistakes that unconscious communicators make all the time, and it's wild how heavily they rely on basic psychology. Take emotional leakage, for instance. When you're anxious or maybe feeling a bit desperate, your brain unconsciously leaks those feelings. Maybe your voice pitch goes up or you start speaking super fast, and boom, your credibility takes a hit. Or how about information dumping? That's where we just overwhelm people with a wall of facts, which causes a cognitive overload and triggers instant mental resistance. A truly conscious communicator spots these psychological traps, regulates their own internal emotions, and intentionally controls the frame of the entire conversation.
So, avoiding those fatal mistakes is step 1. But here's the kicker. This all kicks in the exact moment you walk into a room. Let's look at the actual neuroscience of first impressions.
3 seconds. That's it. You have exactly 3 seconds before the human brain completely categorizes you. In literally less time than it takes to take a deep breath, the people in the room have unconsciously assigned you a status level. They've already decided if you're highly competent, totally trustworthy, or just entirely forgettable.
In psychology, this phenomenon is called thin slice judgments. And the fascinating part? It's not a flaw in our thinking. It is a deeply ingrained evolutionary survival mechanism. The brain takes just a tiny slice of visual and behavioral data. Stuff like your physical presence, your posture, and whether you're holding a steady 3 to 5 second eye contact, and it makes massive, sweeping predictions about your character. If your shoulders are slumped, their brain immediately flags you as low confidence. But if you hold strong eye contact, you trigger their brain to instantly respect you as an authority.
Which brings us right to how you behave after those critical 3 seconds. How do you step into that authority and establish genuine command without coming across as, aggressive or overbearing?
Well, there's a really stark dichotomy here that most people completely misunderstand. Aggression is a reactive force. It's deeply rooted in insecurity, and it actively destroys trust. Authority, on the other hand, true authority is magnetic. It's calm, it's highly controlled, and it stems from profound emotional regulation. When you possess true psychological authority, you don't ever need to raise your voice or force compliance. People just naturally defer to you because your competence and your emotional stability actually make them feel secure.
And honestly, one of the most powerful tools to project that calm authority is strategic silence. It generally evolves in 3 steps. First, you've got the confidence pause, just taking a beat before you speak to show you aren't rushing. Then there's the invitation silence, which you use to draw other people into the conversation. But the one I really want to highlight for you is the emphasis pause. You use this right after delivering a key point to let the power of your words physically sink into the listener's brain. I'm actually using a deliberate emphasis pause right here. Let that silence do the heavy lifting for you.
Now that we've nailed down presence and authority, let's talk about the psychology of getting what you actually want. This is the persuasion operating system. It's how we change minds ethically, entirely without resorting to cheap manipulation.
Let me ask you a question. Do people decide with logic, or do they decide with emotion?
Look, we all absolutely love to think of ourselves as these highly rational, logical creatures, but the psychological truth completely shatters that illusion. Neuroscience shows us over and over again that the human brain decides emotionally first. It makes the choice based on a gut feeling, and that it frantically uses logic later to justify what it's already decided.
Because of that, ethical persuasion has to engage those emotions first, and we do that through 7 core psychological principles. You've got to identify their underlying motivations, build real, genuine rapport, and lean heavily into strategic storytelling, because facts tell but stories sell by painting vivid, emotional mental pictures. You also need to proactively address their resistance, create legitimate urgency, and frankly, just make it incredibly easy for their brain to say yes. Again, we're not manipulating anyone here, we're just perfectly aligning our request with how the human brain naturally processes decisions.
Having that persuasion operating system is amazing, but applying it out in the real world, that requires a very rare psychological skill called social calibration, and this is the true foundation of what we call charisma.
Social calibration is essentially your ability to read the unwritten rules of any room and instantly adapt your energy to match it. Think about it. If you walk into a formal boardroom, the power dynamics and required tone are super structured and respectful. But in a casual setting, you need a collaborative, laid-back, patient energy. And what if there's a crisis? You absolutely have to project calm, decisive leadership. The most sophisticated communicators out there don't just trot out the same static personality for every room. They dynamically adapt their emotional tone to perfectly fit the specific psychological needs of their environment.
And that leads us to a massive misconception. We usually think of charismatic people as the loud, overly entertaining center of attention, right? But the psychological truth is entirely backward. Real charisma is about making others feel like they're the center of attention. It's all about presence intensity. When you shift your focus entirely to the other person, using emotional attunement to genuinely understand them, you trigger these immensely powerful positive emotions in their brain. And guess what? They associate those great feelings directly with you. That is what makes someone truly magnetic.
So we know the rules, we know the underlying neuroscience, and we know the strategies. The final piece of the puzzle is how we hardwire all of this psychology into our daily lives to guarantee real, lasting influence.
Achieving mastery here is a lifelong journey, and your brain is going to adapt in very distinct phases. On day 1, you're really just starting with pattern recognition. You're just noticing your own nervous tics or where you might be emotionally leaking. By week 1, you're engaging in deliberate practice, intentionally testing out those strategic silences or a more confident posture. By month 1, the magic of neuroplasticity kicks in and you experience habit formation. And by year 1, this entire psychological framework becomes automatic behavior. You won't even have to think about it anymore. You will just naturally walk in and command the room.
Which leaves us with one final, absolutely critical question for you to ponder. How will you apply this psychology to your very next conversation? The invisible game of communication is happening all around you, every single day, whether you realize it or not. Are you going to keep playing it unconsciously, letting your brain leak insecurity and sabotage your influence? Or are you going to intentionally step up, take control, use these psychological tools, and truly master your magnetic presence? The choice is entirely up to you. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.